The house was silent that afternoon, the kind of silence that resembles a held breath before a thunderclap. I was just putting some things away in the cupboard when I heard quick footsteps coming from the hallway. Before I could even turn around, the door slammed open, banging against the wall, and my daughter emerged like a storm. Her face was red, her eyes wide, and her hands trembled, not from cold, but from an explosive mixture of anger, fear, and something deeper, something I couldn't yet identify. That's when she screamed, her voice broken, but loud enough to echo throughout the house. "You ruined my life!" The sentence cut through the air like a shard of glass. I froze. I didn't know whether to respond, move forward, retreat, or simply let her vent. The intensity of the scream was so great that it seemed impossible it came from the same girl I had taught to ride a bike, who laughed loudly on the sofa while we watched old movies. That version of her, there before me, seemed like a different person. And with each passing second, it was as if I were standing before a door that opened to a completely unknown world, a world where I, apparently, was the villain. The tension in the air was almost palpable. It was as if the room itself had stopped to observe the scene. Even the sound of the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate between a tick and a tock. My first reaction was to try to understand what the hell had happened. What had I done? What had I failed to do? How could I have ruined her life if I barely knew what was going on? I sought her gaze, but she looked away, as if afraid that the truth would fall along with the tears that stubbornly formed in the corners of her eyes. My heart was beating so hard it seemed to respond to her scream in an erratic rhythm. I felt it at the same time. Blame, as if he had missed an important warning. Fear because there was something about that explosion that didn't make sense. And a kind of deep sadness. It was the kind of pain only someone who loves unconditionally can feel when they see someone who should be safe lose their footing. And even then, behind all that impact, there was something more. The unsettling feeling that she wasn't telling the whole story. There was something hidden behind that scream, something big. Outside, I heard the sound of a gate creaking. It was the neighbors, probably drawn by the commotion. The dog next door started barking, as if announcing that something out of the ordinary was happening. The window curtain trembled, and I knew someone was spying. Family living nearby must have heard too. Cell phones probably started vibrating in group chats. That phrase, "You ruined my life," would spread like wildfire. I was still trying to process everything, but the world around me already seemed to have chosen a side, hers. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak, almost a whisper. "Daughter, what happened?" She took a step back, as if my attempt to approach her was a threat. Her gaze hardened even more, as if she wanted to protect herself from something I didn't know existed. It was as if she had constructed an entire story within herself, a story where I occupied the role of being responsible for all her pain. But there was something strange. Despite the anger, there was also an evident fear, a fear that didn't match someone who is certain of their own accusation. It was as if she were trying to keep a narrative alive, but without being able to fully sustain it. I felt guilt engulfing me. Did I fail to listen? Did I unknowingly reject a plea for help? Was I too harsh, or too absent, or too naive? Each possibility pierced me like an arrow, because when a child blames a parent, even without proof, the parent's heart searches for reasons, because it hurts to imagine that there is pain there, and that perhaps you are partly to blame. Still, there was something that simply, it wouldn't close. Something she avoided saying. She was breathing too fast. Her hand gripped her phone as if it depended on her. She couldn't look me in the eye for more than a second. All of this was more than just anger. It was panic. Panic about something that was about to surface. I took a step forward, trying to keep my voice steady but soft. "Explain it to me. I want to help you." She opened her mouth as if to answer, but stopped. Her eyes trembled. The silence that followed was so profound that it seemed to reveal more than any words. And in that instant, I realized she was being pressured by someone, by something, by a situation I had no idea about. And that's when the strongest feeling took hold of me. The certainty that she wasn't telling everything. It wasn't just a family conflict. It wasn't just a moment of impulsiveness. There was something bigger, hidden, that she was afraid to reveal. She took a deep breath, turned her back, and left the room as if fleeing a ghost. I stood there, as if my own body had taken root. Everything was wrong. Everything was incomplete. And I knew that that phrase, that scream, wouldn't be the end, but the beginning of something far more complicated. And I was right, because the next day, when the doorbell rang and I saw a man with a serious demeanor, formal clothes, and an inquisitive look standing at my door, holding a name tag, I felt my stomach drop. He said only one sentence before entering, "We need to talk about your daughter." And that's when I discovered that that explosive scream, it would take a detective to our door. To understand that devastating cry, "You ruined my life!" It was necessary to go back in time, long before the walls of our house witnessed such an explosion. Our relationship had been solid for many years. Not perfect, of course, but built on long conversations, laughter at the end of the day, and small rituals that only close-knit families understand. I was always the kind of father who tried to teach with patience, even when life sometimes demanded firmness. She, on the other hand, had a contagious joy, immense sensitivity, and a loving manner that lit up the whole house. If someone asked me, I would say that we were close. Perhaps not like in movie stories, but close enough that each other's worlds made sense within each other. But life has a silent way of changing everything without warning. The first change was almost imperceptible. She started spending more time in her room. Nothing out of the ordinary. Teenagers do that all the time, so I didn't think much of it. Then came the short answers, the averted glances, the everything's fine that didn't really sound fine. I tried to talk to her, but she always found a way to escape. Sometimes she said she was tired, other times that she had schoolwork, other times she just went upstairs before I could insist. Over time, that distance became a wall. Small at first, almost symbolic, but it grew a little bigger each week. I remember the first lie. It was a silly thing. She said she was going to study at a friend's house. Believed her. The next day, I found out that the friend's mother had been away all week. When I asked her, she got angry, too reactive for someone who had only made up an excuse. I tried not to turn it into a bigger conflict, but the discomfort remained. Then came other lies, small but frequent, like little dots connecting something bigger, something she was desperately trying to hide. Messages that she deleted too quickly, calls that would end as soon as I approached, departures that lacked a clear explanation, a nervousness that arose out of nowhere. Her grades started to drop. Teachers mentioned that she seemed distracted, distant, anxious. Something was happening, and with each attempt I made to get closer, she withdrew further, as if I were part of the problem, when in fact all I wanted was to help her carry the weight she insisted on hiding alone. There was one particular night that I can't get out of my memory. I heard her crying in the room, soft, muffled, as if afraid. Someone would notice his pain. I stood in front of the door for a few minutes, my hand raised to knock, but I didn't. At that moment, my biggest fear was being rejected again, so I turned around and went downstairs. To this day, that is one of the moments that weighs most heavily on me, because if I had hit him, maybe everything would have taken a different turn. The following weeks were marked by silent conflicts. She didn't yell, she didn't argue, she just withdrew. A calculated, painful, and continuous withdrawal. I watched the daughter I knew slowly disappear and give way to someone I couldn't understand. It was as if she were living two lives, one in front of me and another completely hidden, full of secrets she carried alone, even if those secrets were destroying her. And the further she walked away, the more I wondered. Where did I go wrong? Had I been too harsh at some point? Had he stopped supporting her when she needed it? Did I miss any important signals? It was terrible. To realize that despite all my attempts, I was a stranger in my own daughter's life. We tried to talk a few times. On one of those attempts, I calmly asked, "Daughter, please, can you tell me what's going on? You've been acting so differently." She looked at me for a few seconds, seconds that seemed far too long, and replied, You would never understand. That sentence, short and cold, pierced like a needle. It was confirmation that there was something big, much bigger than I had imagined. But she didn't trust me enough to share. That's when the suspicious behavior began. Excessive nervousness upon hearing the cell phone ring, mysterious visitors at the gate, crumpled notes thrown in the trash, with incomplete words torn in half. Once, I found a letter she had tried to destroy, just fragments, but enough to smell a strong whiff of threat, of fear, of something clearly inappropriate for someone her age to handle alone. I wanted to act, but any attempt on my part was met with aggression. It seemed like she had been trained to keep me away, and that hurt. It hurt in a way that's impossible to explain, because there's no greater pain than knowing that someone you love is suffering, but refuses to let you help. The connection between us seemed increasingly fragile, almost transparent. I could still see sometimes the childlike sparkle in her eyes, though hidden behind new and dense layers of anxiety. But it was like trying to reach someone inside a dark tunnel. I would call. She wouldn't answer. I would turn on a light. She would turn it off. And then came the signs of something deeper, a debt, a complicated relationship, pressure from other people, threats. I didn't know, but I felt, with every fiber of my being, that she was trapped in some kind of situation that overwhelmed her. And for some reason, she thought I was part of the problem, not the solution. The worst part was this: being silenced within your own family. The pain of not being heard, of not being considered, of feeling that your voice no longer has a place in the life of the one you raised, is indescribable. Day after day, I tried to find a way to reach her, but it seemed that the more I reached out, the more she hid. And this distance slowly placed us on opposite sides of an invisible line, a line that, in the future, would become an abyss. Then came the day I realized everything had spiraled out of control. She was more nervous than ever, staring at her phone as if something was about to explode. She paced back and forth, muttering to herself, her hands trembling. When I tried to talk to her, just to ask how her day was, she gave me a look filled with panic and then anger. It was at that moment that I realized she wasn't angry with me. That was what the world around her had become, and she needed to blame someone. And the easiest thing to do was to blame those who were closest. The distance between us, which was already great, became a chasm, and I couldn't cross. And then, at the beginning of that week, at 8 in the morning, while I was having coffee trying to understand where everything had gone wrong, I heard the noise that would change everything. Firm knocks on the door. When I opened it, I saw 2 police officers and a detective looking directly at me. My throat went dry. My heart raced. And I understood that the situation, which was already out of emotional control, was about to escalate into something much worse. Because the situation worsened until the police knocked on the door. The door was open, but whoever entered seemed to occupy the entire space. The detective had a serious, almost impenetrable posture, the kind of presence that makes anyone automatically straighten their spine, even without knowing why. He was dressed simply, light shirt, dark blazer, but there was something in his way of walking, of observing, even of breathing, that conveyed absolute authority. He didn't need to raise his voice. He spoke little. He spoke softly, and yet he made each word weigh like a block of concrete. He pulled his name tag from his pocket with a precise movement, showed it briefly, and said with unsettling calm, "We need to talk." His voice was firm but not aggressive, professional but with a hint of compassion, a rare combination that made it clear he wasn't there to argue. He was there to unravel. With each step he took into the room, he seemed to analyze everything: the photos on the shelf, the position of the curtains, the emotional state of each person present. And just one look at my daughter was enough for him to realize there was more to that story than a simple family conflict. She was sitting on the sofa, but she couldn't stay still. Her fingers tapped on her knee, her eyes avoided any contact, her cell phone gripped tightly in her hand as if it were a shield. When the detective approached, she shrank back a little, just a little, but enough for anyone paying attention to notice that she was afraid of something. He pulled up a chair, turned to face her, and sat down with a calmness that only someone in complete control of the situation can demonstrate. Then he crossed his hands and, in a neutral tone, asked, "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" She took a deep breath, as if preparing an entire narrative in her head, and then she began. He ruined my life. He always controlled everything. He never let me do anything. He pressured me until I couldn't take it anymore." Her voice rose and fell as if she were trying to convince not only the detective but herself. The words came out quickly, laden with emotion but without clear form. It was like watching someone trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. The detective listened to everything without interrupting, without changing his expression. He simply observed, as if analyzing every gesture, every pause, every tremor. Sitting beside her, I felt my heart shrink with each sentence. It wasn't just pain. It was disbelief. That wasn't the truth. That was a story built on fear, pressure, or manipulation, but not on facts. And yet hearing her say that hurt like a knife. When she finally stopped talking, the detective tilted his head slightly to the side, as if mentally reorganizing what she had just said. And then, for the first time, he asked a question. "Do you have any proof of what you're saying?" She froze for a second, but replied quickly, I don't need proof. I know what he did." The detective didn't argue. He simply adjusted his chair slightly forward, moving a few centimeters closer. This minimal change was enough to alter the entire energy of the room. The atmosphere became heavy, dense, as if something inevitable was about to happen. That's when he opened a folder of documents, something that seemed to have been prepared with great care, and placed some papers, a cell phone, and a printed sheet on the table. But before touching any item, he did what would be the turning point of the story. He stepped forward, looked my daughter directly in the eyes, and in the same calm voice, yet laden with a truth that could not be ignored, said, "If all of this is true, then explain where you were that night." The impact was immediate. My daughter opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. Her eyes widened as if someone had pulled the rug out from under her feet. His hands were trembling. The cell phone almost slipped. His breathing became short, rapid, and erratic. It was the kind of reaction that only someone confronted with something they can't handle would show. The detective didn't pressure her. He just waited. Absolute silence. And that silence, it said it all. She tried to look away, but she couldn't. She tried to formulate an answer, but her own mind seemed to freeze. It seemed like a child who, after trying so hard to hide something, finally realizes that reality has cornered them. The detective, with calculated patience, continued to look at her, without raising his voice, without showing anger, but making it clear that the question carried a weight she couldn't ignore. The entire room seemed to have stopped. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to stop for a moment. As I watched everything, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, that the truth was finally trying to emerge. Not complete, not yet, but it was like a crack in the wall, the beginning of the collapse of a narrative built on fear, lies, and hidden despair. My daughter put her hand to her face, trying to hide the trembling. Her eyes began to tear up, not from pain, but from panic. She knew that was the point of no return. After what felt like an eternity in those long seconds, she finally murmured, I can't explain." The detective leaned back in his chair as if he had already expected that exact answer. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply jotted something down in his notebook, looked up again, and said with a chilling serenity, "So, let's continue." The feeling that filled the room was indescribable, a mixture of shock, relief, and fear of what was yet to come. I knew that moment was just the beginning. Something much bigger lay beneath the surface. Something she didn't want, or couldn't, reveal. The detective closed his notebook, looked at the two of us, and, without changing his tone, uttered the words that brought that chapter to a close in the most electrifying way possible. From here on out, everything will change. And so it was, at that exact moment, that the entire room transformed into a stage where the truth would finally begin to emerge, piece by piece, even though no one was prepared for what was to come. After that question, she couldn't answer. So explain where you were that night. The story finally began to unravel. Not all at once, not beautifully, but in the only way the truth usually comes out. In pieces, hurting, tearing masks, exposing what nobody wanted to see. The detective returned a few days later, this time with more documents, printouts of messages, bank statements, and an even more serious look in his eyes. It wasn't just about a family disagreement anymore. Things had gone too far. We all sat in the living room, me, my daughter, and two relatives who insisted on being there. The atmosphere was like a wake. She was pale, with deep, dark circles under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept properly for days. Neither had I. Even though I had been accused, even though the words, "You," ruined my life, still echoed within me, a part of my heart remained worried. Not about what people thought of me, but about the abyss into which she was clearly falling. The detective placed the folder on the table, opened it calmly, and began. I'll be blunt. What's happening here isn't just a conflict between father and daughter. There's a bigger problem, and it involves people she unfortunately chose to listen to. He pulled out the first sheet. It was a statement, with my name on it. This loan here, he pointed out, was taken out using your information, but the signature, the registration attempts, the computer's IP address, and the phone line confirm that it wasn't you. I felt a chill running up my spine. It was her. My daughter's eyes widened. She started to babble something, but the detective raised his hand, asking her to calm down. Let me finish, he said, still without raising his voice. Next, he showed me the printed messages. Conversations between my daughter and a friend I'd seen at home a few times. That friend who always seemed to know everything, who gave advice on living life, who presented herself as someone who understood the world better than any adult. In the screenshots, everything was there. Use your father's information, he won't even notice. Then you say he doesn't let you do anything, that he pressures you too much. If things go wrong, just say you did it because he's holding you back, that you have no choice. The sentences were like stabs. I read them and felt my stomach churn, not just because of the crime itself, but because of the level of manipulation. She wasn't just making mistakes. She was being led. The detective continued. The money from that loan wasn't used for anything that benefited you or your family. It was used to pay off other people's debts, parties, trips, and purchases in the names of people who don't live in this house. People who knew very well what they were doing and used you as a middleman. And then came the even harder part. He placed a few more sheets of paper on the table. Screenshots of conversations with an older boy, someone I didn't know. Your father is controlling. He destroyed his dreams. If you show that he's the villain, nobody will blame you. You just need to stick to that story. Say he ruined your life. It was as if I were seeing, in writing, the script of the scream she had let out that day. You ruined my life, she repeated what she had heard. She adopted a narrative that wasn't hers, but which seemed to justify the weight of the choices she had made. The detective then explained calmly, she is not being accused of a violent crime, nor of anything irreversible, but what happened is serious. There is fraud, misuse of data, collusion with people who are already under investigation. So, my voice came out weak. She did all this because of pressure from them. The detective took a deep breath. Due to pressure, fear, influence. But in the end, there was a choice. Hers. And that's what hurts the most. My daughter started to cry. Not that restrained, discreet cry. It was the cry of someone who finally sees the bubble burst. She brought her hands to her face, repeating, I didn't want it to be like this. I just didn't want to disappoint anyone. I looked at her, feeling a confusing mix of emotions. Pain, anger, compassion, exhaustion. There, the full revelation finally came together. What was she hiding? Who had allowed friends and a secret relationship to use his own father's name to access easy money? That he had lied for months to cover it all up? That she was trying to maintain a victim narrative in order to avoid facing responsibility? What did she do? He participated in a fraud scheme, helping to access loans using my information, believing that He would figure it out later. When things started to get tough, she preferred to create a villain, me, rather than admit that she had been deceived, manipulated, and that she had also made mistakes. Why did he blame the narrator? Because it was easier to point the finger than to admit that they had chosen to trust the wrong people. Because they told her that if she maintained the story that I was controlling, abusive, oppressive, everything would fall on me. Because turning a father into a monster seemed, in her mind, like an escape route. What was she afraid of? Fear of being arrested, fear of being judged by the family, fear of losing the image of a good daughter, fear of facing the fact that deep down, no one forced her to do anything. She wanted to be accepted by people who never truly loved her. The family was divided. Some looked at me with guilty eyes, realizing they had judged me too quickly. Others looked at her angrily, as if they wanted to shake her shoulders and ask, "Why did you do that?" The atmosphere resembled a mixture of a courtroom and a confessional, hurt but composed. I took a deep breath. What did I want to do at that moment? Scream? Throw her out of the house? Say, "I told you so"? Perhaps. But above all, I saw a lost girl, buried under wrong choices and external voices that poisoned her. The detective then concluded, legally, she will have to answer for it. Not in the same way as the others involved, because she was used, influenced, and that matters. But we can't pretend nothing happened. You have a long road ahead, of reparation, of conversation, and of truth. My daughter finally lifted her head, her face swollen from crying so much, and looked at me. Her voice came out low, almost unrecognizable. I just wanted someone to see me. I felt the blow, because in a twisted way, that phrase said a lot. She wanted to be seen by her friends, by her boyfriend, by the world. And in that pursuit, she allowed herself to be molded by someone who didn't care at all about what would happen to her afterward. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to organize what I was feeling. When I spoke, it wasn't out of hatred. It was with a pain that came from an even deeper place. I always saw you. The problem is that you stopped seeing yourself. When you believed someone who only wanted to use you, silence. No one had anything more to add. Because finally, there were no more excuses, no scripts, no prepared speeches. There was only the truth. And however harsh it was, the truth also brought something that hadn't appeared in that house for a long time. The chance to start. Over. Not an easy or quick start, but a possible start. One that would require therapy, responsibility, legal agreements, new boundaries, and above all, emotional maturity. As the detective stood up to leave, a phrase echoed inside me. A phrase that, in a way, summed up everything we had experienced. Sometimes, the burden they place on us is merely the shadow of the choices they are afraid to make. If this story captivated you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me bring more deep and truthful stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been accused of something you didn't do?